Hello, everyone, and happy National Drive Electric Week. Thank you for joining our discussion today with electric company CEOs on electric vehicles, the energy grid, and how electric companies are supporting customers. I'm Kellen Schefter, Director of Electric Transportation at Edison Electric Institute. EEI is the association that represents all investor-owned electric companies in the United States, and we are happy to be a sponsor of National Drive Electric Week this year. And I'm very pleased today to have two leaders from our industry joining us for this dialogue. I'll introduce them now, and then we'll get into the discussion. So first, we have Pedro Pizarro, President and CEO of Edison International. Thanks for being here, Pedro.
My pleasure. Thanks, Kellen.
And also joining us today is Patti, President and CEO of CMS Energy. Hi, Patti.
Hey, Kellen. Great to be with you. Nice to be with you, Pedro, as always.
Likewise, Patti.
So we greatly appreciate you both taking the time for this conversation today. You're both CEOs of large organizations that have an important job to do, which is to deliver electricity to customers in a safe, affordable, reliable, and increasingly clean manner. But you're also both leaders for our industry on this issue, electric transportation. So I'd really like to start with the big picture. Why is a CEO of an electric company like yourselves interested in electric vehicles and electric transportation in general? So let's start with you, Patti, for that one.
Well, thank you for asking, Kellen. You know, I reflect on a conversation I had with one of our colleagues, Warner Baxter from Ameren, and he and I were talking one day, and he reminded me of the incredible opportunity that we have as an industry to both decarbonize our own energy supply, but also be a catalyst to decarbonizing transportation. And what a significant impact we can have as leaders of energy companies right now to move this entire to create a movement really across the nation and do our part to save the planet. And so it really is exciting to me to be part of that. And I think of it as a legacy sort of role to play. And someday they'll write books about this transformation. And I hope that the electric utility industry is well represented in the transition.
That's great. And thanks, Patti. So Pedro, same question to you. Why is this an issue that you and your peers are focused on today?
Sure, thanks. And I mean, I can start by saying if you've been in an electric vehicle like Patti and I both drive, it's fun and consumers going to figure it out. And so this is the future. But in seriousness, for us, there's a broader context. And, you know, with most of our operations being in California, the reality is we are living the impacts of climate change right now. We just had 5 out of the 6 largest wildfires in the state's history have happened since last August. And we're seeing other impacts. So as our company started looking at this a few years ago, thinking not just about the electric industry, but about how the California economy writ large can meet its decarbonization target by 2045. That's what the state has set out. You know, when we ran the math on this, and the reality is that we can get there as a society, we can do it affordably. Consumers will spend on average a third less on energy when we get there. But here's what it'll require: clean energy to power the economy, a lot of storage, and then electrifying just a number of uses across the economy where today we take a fossil fuel and pour it in a tank and burn it up, and that's not all that efficient. And so in California, transportation accounts for around 50% of greenhouse gas emissions. So there is frankly no more impactful or affordable way to decarbonize than to electrify the fleet in California. So we've been spending a lot of time on this, and really pleased that recently you may have seen that our governor set an aggressive new target for advancing electrification. We'll probably talk about that a little later, but a lot going on here, and the pedal's down to the metal.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for that. I really appreciate it. And so now that we've set the stage, you know, we know National Drive Electric Week is about electric vehicle drivers, which includes both of you. So I wanted to frame the discussion today around things that those drivers out there may need to know about electric vehicles, the energy grid, and how they interact with their electric companies in ways that maybe they haven't considered. So I want to thank the folks at Plug in America, one of the lead organizers on National Drive Electric Week, for providing us a few prompts that they thought would be top of mind for the EV drivers out there. We get so much into our electric company space, but there's general drivers out there that I think are really curious for your answers on some of these. So let's get into those. First, there is still some concern out there how the energy grid will handle electric vehicles, right? So that if too many EVs plug in at the same time, it could strain the grid. So Pedro, let me go back to you for that one. Is that a concern you have today for the system as it is today? And then how does your company plan for more EVs into the future?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Kellen. And electric utilities plan in 10 years ahead. I think that's pretty true across the country. The transition will be a lot faster now in California since the governor's announcement that all new vehicle sales will be zero emission by 2035.
Right.
But that still gives us a 15-year window to plan for that, right? So we've been through this as an industry before, a little before Patti and my time, but I would hope to say. But we've seen the advent of air conditioning, for example, right, which really is an appliance that's truly a mass appliance now, and utilities were able to plan thoughtfully for that. And so, with us, the work we're doing right now is looking at how do we see that pathway to increase the number of electric vehicles on the road, what's needed for that, and what do we need to do, not only in terms of sources of supply, but the strength of our grid. Where do we need to make sure we have a more robust grid to accommodate not only passenger vehicles, but think also about fleets. Think about, large players like Amazon or Walmart or UPS or FedEx, as they electrify their fleets, right? And they set up big depots. We need to make sure that we are planning ahead for that and strengthening the grid. But, given that this is not going to happen overnight, I'd love it if it happened even faster, right? But it's not like we're going to get to 100% of new vehicle sales in 2022. 2035 will be a stretch for our state, and I think other states are probably not quite at that pace yet. That gives our peers across the industry the chance to plan and build and be ready for our consumers.
Great, thank you so much. That's such an important message. And so, Patti, there's almost a flip side of this, right? Which is a related point. And many EV drivers may not be aware of this because it's a little counterintuitive, but rather than EVs straining the grid, there's actually this opportunity for EVs to benefit the energy grid, and that can be a win for everyone. So assuming we don't have a bunch of electrical engineers out there listening to this, can you explain kind of what that means? What is it about the energy grid that actually makes that possible?
Yeah, so the neat thing about electric vehicles, and there's an important point about electric vehicles, is that our grid is designed to serve at a very peak day plus a reserve margin. And so everything on the entire grid is designed for that. And so with this one fundamental in place, that we charge off peak, that we're not all charging our electric vehicles when it is already a peak, we actually have the opportunity to more fully utilize existing infrastructure that's in place to serve that peak. Now, that's at a very local level, that's not necessarily true. The fleets that Pedro mentioned, they'll have localized load that will require some new infrastructure. Right. But at a very macro level, one of the things that just really excites me is that if we can, as the utilities, who have both the accountability for reliability, but also the ability to be the system orchestrator to make sure we have the energy we need when we need it. I'm really excited about the notion that having these electric vehicles on our grid, imagine them as mobile storage devices, and having the opportunity to actually optimize and more fully utilize our current infrastructure, and actually even potentially use those vehicles as a resource to supply during peak moments if a customer so chooses to participate. And so it just feels like it's a great opportunity for the electric industry to really get progressive and be focused on providing customers the choice that they want, the ability to charge their vehicle and get wherever they want to go, but also to optimize the efficiency of the grid. It's an exciting time in this industry, and thankfully we do have time to plan, as Pedro mentioned, but we're never too early to get ready to implement the necessary technology. But at the very macro level, to me, that means that we can add electric vehicles at scale and reduce the unit cost of energy for everyone because we're more fully utilizing our existing infrastructure.
That's excellent. That's so important to point out. And I want to build on something you did just mention, Patti, which is, this idea of how electric companies can actually help support charging infrastructure out there, right? You mentioned, I think we all understand this, if you're driving an EV, of course you need a place to plug in. I think for a lot of drivers today, that means the easiest option is to plug into their own garage at home. But we know a lot of drivers don't have a garage, maybe don't have a dedicated parking space. We know we need to accommodate them. But we also know for some of these longer trips, right, maybe beyond your daily driving needs, there is a need for public infrastructure to help facilitate those longer trips. And we know this is one of the primary barriers to widespread adoption out there, is this need for charging infrastructure. But EV drivers today may not know that they can actually look to your companies, the electric companies, to actually help provide some of these solutions. So I'm hoping you can share a little bit of maybe a few examples of what your companies are doing today to actually proactively make it easier for drivers out there to find a place to charge. So let me go back to Pedro for that one. Could you share an example or two from your company and what you're doing today?
Yeah, sure, happy to. And I'll acknowledge that as you look across the country, there are different models for how utilities engage on this.
Right.
In California, though, we are seeing, I think California today has something like half of the electric vehicles in the US.
Right.
So this is a much more near term, present issue for us.
Yeah.
And so we have had good support from our regulators in deploying new programs to address charging. We just got approval a few weeks ago of a program called Charge Ready 2, which extended a pilot that we had before and took it to the large scale. And so this is the largest investor-owned utility program in the country today, supporting charging. We won't own most of those chargers. Most of those chargers will be owned by the building owner. We'll own some of them in specific applications, but this will support the installation of 38,000 chargers across our 50,000 square mile territory. We serve 15 million customers. Now that sounds like a lot, and it's $436 million. So that's a lot of money too, right?
Sure.
It's a big investment, but frankly, it's a small down payment in terms of what's needed across the economy, because that number of chargers is actually a little less than a third of the chargers that will be needed in our area by 2025, let alone 2030 or 2035,
right.
And let alone including the governor's acceleration of the timeline here. So that, though, is a really important program because we're helping customers put those chargers in areas, we call them long dwell spaces. So places where cars can be parked for a while. Might be in an apartment building, might be in a shopping mall, or in an office building. Now, the important part of that, though, Kellen, is that this transition to electric vehicles can't just be for the folks who can afford the brand new high-end EV.
Right.
This needs to be a transition that's fair to everybody, and particularly with the different conversation we have in the country now around social equity and racial justice. We can't leave our disadvantaged communities behind. So if you look at our program, something like $200 million out of that 436 is being dedicated specifically for installations at multifamily dwellings and or in disadvantaged communities, right? So that we can make sure that the charging infrastructure is there even if you don't own a garage. And we also want to make sure there are incentives for not only the new cars, but the incentives for the second-hand, maybe third-hand cars that will be needed to get deployed into disadvantaged and low-income communities, because this has to be a transition for all. One other charging piece that we're working on is not just for passenger cars, but for medium and heavy-duty vehicles. We have another program that targets that same sort of model of helping deploy infrastructure to support the chargers. But for medium and heavy duty, that's a $350-some million program that will help bring in the charging infrastructure for around 8,500 medium and heavy duty vehicles. Now, why is that important in a place in California, and especially for disadvantaged communities? Well, it means that you're replacing a lot of trucks that today are spewing all sorts of diesel fumes and exhaust. And by the way, in Southern California, if you visited here, a lot of those trucks are on those freeways that cut right through disadvantaged communities, going between the ports and distribution centers. So this is not just a greenhouse gas thing, it's a local air quality thing for our local communities, our disadvantaged communities, if we can replace diesel with electricity.
Thank you, Pedro. That's Great to hear, and congrats on getting those programs up and running. So Patti, Pedro talked a little about particularly sort of long dwell locations where they're supporting infrastructure. Your company, Consumers Energy, actually just made some news with an agreement among 6 energy companies in the Midwest to actually help build out charging infrastructure along travel corridors to help enable the transportation or the movement of EVs across that region. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means for your customers in your area?
Yeah, this is really consequential for EV drivers, especially where we don't have the concentration like California really does. And we're always so happy. I always feel like California is a postcard from the future for us to see the volume of EV penetration. And we can't wait till that's true in Michigan and in the Midwest too. But electric companies really do need to form that backbone of charging infrastructure. And we can help signal confidence for would-be EV drivers that charging infrastructure will be available. In fact, I'll just tell you a personal story. I was going to drive up into northern Michigan, go visit one of our power plants up in Ludington, one of the largest pump storage facilities in the world. It's a beautiful, clean energy facility we're very proud of. But I was going to go visit my facility and then go further up north for a business leader meeting. And I couldn't get there in my EV. There wasn't enough infrastructure. And this was not long ago. So I had to actually take my husband's pickup truck. This is a bad outcome. So we need to deploy this infrastructure. And so here in Michigan and in partnership with several Midwest utilities, we are committing to knitting together a strategic plan of where those high-speed public charging stations will be. We've already deployed several of them in Michigan. And so if I was going to make that trip tomorrow, I could make that trip. And that was over about a 6-month time period here that change occurred. So that was good news. But I'll also suggest or just say that part of our partnership with our regulators to build out this infrastructure in the Midwest, we're also offering rebates to homeowners who do want to put a home charger in, and also charging at workplaces, which proves to be a big incentive for EV adoption because someone can get the best parking spot every day if they're driving an EV. So that's an early adopter kind of mindset. And then of course, more of these public chargers, which are so important for people to make their infrequent but desirable long drives when they want to.
Well, that's great. And I'm glad you're able to make all the trips you need to now in your EV. That's exciting. So far we've been mostly talking about, EV drivers as individuals, but you both mentioned the other opportunities out there. We know electric transportation is getting bigger, literally. We are now seeing heavier trucks, buses, other equipment that can be electrified coming to market, which really does bring this conversation to a whole new set of customers. So these are your commercial fleet operators, your public transit operators who are looking to meet their sustainability objectives and improve their operational costs. So I am pleased to share that just this week, EEI announced that our members are making new commitments to lead by example in electrifying their own fleets. Taking all these individual goals that our members are making together, EEI members are on track to electrify about 1/3 of their overall fleet by 2030. And this is a major step forward, and Patti and Pedro, you were both instrumental in leading this effort for our industry. So Pedro, for a fleet customer that might be watching this today and considering electrification, why is it important that they see their electric company doing the same and adding EVs to their fleet?
Well, we can talk a lot, but we got to walk that talk. I mean, it's that simple, right? And we do have large fleets ourselves. Those fleets include light duty vehicles. They include very, heavy duty vehicles. I think as you look at the EEI commitments, a number of us, we have heavier or more sizable commitments on the lighter duty side because those vehicles are more available and the heavier duty market is still emerging. But, we need to be standing shoulder to shoulder with our fleet customers and going to the experience, having our own commitment. And frankly, if there are pain points, what better way to experience them and address them than actually being in there, right there with those customers. So, seeing again, large operators make the kind of commitments that they have made, we need to be right in there with them. We need to do the same. And oh, by the way, I know that a lot of our field crews are pretty excited when they think about the prospect of a an electric vehicle. We just had a visit here recently from Lordstown Motors. It's a startup working on an electric pickup that, in our industry uses a whole lot of pickup trucks. So if we can show companies like Lordstown that we're interested, that's also a great market signal that helps stimulate the development of more vehicle alternatives for us and for our customers.
Great. And so, Patti, turning to you, this point that Pedro just raised about sending a market signal to manufacturers is an important one. So I want to explore that for a moment. We know that increasing EV adoption across all of these sectors, from pickup trucks or the heavier trucks, really depends on the auto manufacturers bringing these products to market in a way that meets customer needs. And you have some interesting experience here with your background at General Motors from the auto industry side. So if we accept the premise that electrification is the future of transportation, where we're headed, it would seem to be in our economic and even national interest to support, the domestic manufacturing of these products here. And I was just curious, do you have any thoughts you might have about that premise and that idea?
Well, I definitely have thoughts about that idea. I'm a very pro U.S. automakers, and it's funny, the Lordstown Motors that Pedro just described, I spent a couple years of my career at Lordstown Assembly, which is now Lordstown Motors. So the world just keeps getting smaller. It's so fascinating. We obviously are really rooting for all the electric vehicle manufacturers, but certainly our customers here in Michigan, General Motors, Ford, we want to make sure that we support them too. And so we want our automakers to succeed in this. And so we can partner with them. There's so much that we can do together to grow this market. And this is where I think EVs have bipartisan appeal. Electricity is nearly 100% domestic product produced and distributed by U.S. companies. And the U.S. is a leader on battery technology and vehicle manufacturing. And so we have all the tools to succeed here. We just need to work together and get it done.
Well, thank you for that, Patti. And on the theme of us all being in this together, hopefully the EV drivers out there are learning a bit today more about how the electric companies are involved in this, maybe more than they even thought, and that you all have a lot of tools to actually help them to do more. So for my final question, let me turn this around and ask, what can customers do to help us here? If an EV customer is out there today listening, whether they're an individual or a fleet operator, and they would like their electric company to help support them to do more, to add more EVs to their fleet, or to make it a little easier for them, what can they do to help make this a reality? So, Pedro, let me go to you with that one. Any thoughts there?
So, listen, with our companies being regulated utilities, they are so intertwined with the public and the public trust. And the public has a voice, right, in that process. So, our investments that we need to make to support electric vehicles require approval from regulators. And stakeholder participation in the process, stakeholder support is really critical. So I think that the first bit of help is please speak up, right? And let your local governments, let your regulatory agencies know that you want to be able to drive that electric vehicle and you want that infrastructure there. A great venue for that voice is Plug in America. They represent EV drivers across the country. They've been a huge help, been a really strong advocate for these kinds of programs. We also need help from our local communities to make sure that all customers are getting the benefits of EVs. And so we need to make sure, like I said earlier, that no community is left behind. Then I know we already talked about fleet customers like Amazon and Walmart. They can carry a lot of influence too. So I know that Patti and I have enjoyed working with a number of our colleagues in setting up discussions and beginning the relationship so that we can help them deploy their infrastructure and they can help us deploy ours. So this one really requires a lot of collaboration. And for consumers watching this, please help us because it's going to be great for you. It's going to help you, not have the Patti problem and we'll have to worry about charging along the way to wherever you're going.
So, Patti, any thoughts there on how your customers in Michigan can help move electric transportation there even faster?
Well, I do, and I think that there's a two-way street here. We, the utilities, also have a role to play as energy providers and as kind of keepers of the availability of affordable, safe, and reliable energy for all of our customers. it's important that we get as much stakeholder input as possible. And in fact, we learned that sort of the hard way. Our first filing on infrastructure for charging, we sort of went on our own. As a energy provider, we think we're the ones who know, we'll go get it approved, get it installed. And there was some real reaction that we hadn't gotten enough input. And so it's really important that, and we learned through that experience, that we need to get the input of others. And when we did, we had a better plan. So we could partner with more people, we could demonstrate more innovation, we could kind of grow the pie, if you will, and include more people in the process. So I encourage EV owners and operators of fleets or anything associated with electric transportation to reach out to your local Clean Cities organization or an EV organization and find out if they're supporting the local utility in the company programs in your region. The partnership is essential because, again, we are responsible as the energy providers to make sure we have reliable and affordable and safe energy for everyone, but we also want to make sure that we're creating access points for new innovation and new marketplaces, creating new marketplaces as we transition to electric transportation nationwide.
Well, thank you both so much, and we'll have to leave it there. So Patti, Pedro, thank you both for joining me today for this important discussion. Again, EEI is a proud supporter of National Drive Electric Week, and we're happy to bring this message to EV drivers across the country. We hope you all learned a little bit today about how your electric company is a partner with you on this journey, and how excited we are to have you all join us on the path to accelerate electric transportation. So thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you.